Welcome to this Indie Scot News special. On Saturday, 6th of May, there's an all-under-one banner march for independence between Kelvin Grove Park and Glasgow Green. Some of our guests will speak at that event. They are from pro-indie parties and none, but they share one thing in common, something that transcends party affiliation and political position, right or left. That is, of course, a commitment to our national liberation struggle. In alphabetical order, our guests are Ash Regan of the SNP, Colette Walker of the Independence for Scotland Party, David Henry of the SSRG, Neil Hanvey of the Alapa Party, and Sarah Salyers of salvo.scot. Sarah, while Scots march for independence, will Charles become King of Scots? Does he fulfill the criteria? What is the crown in Scotland?
Thank you. Well, anyone who has ever heard me speak is not going to be surprised that I'm coming back to the claim of right, because that's probably the clearest place where we understand what the criterion is. So what the claim of right goes on to say is he also violated the fundamental constitution of Scotland, and it goes into great detail about that, whereby he's forfeited the throne. He can't legally be king because he's required to take that oath by law. Access to government is not the same as being crowned. It's very interesting. We discovered recently that in Scotland, the king or queen acceded to government and to the throne. They weren't crowned because they weren't sovereign. They were not the crown. So let's have a wee look, shall we, at the bit in the coronation oath that really matters here. Whoever is acceding to government in Scotland to become King or Queen of Scots has to take an oath that includes the following: the rights and rents with all just privileges of the Crown of Scotland I shall preserve and keep inviolate, neither shall I transfer nor alienate the same. Now, it'd be pretty funny if a king or queen had to promise to look after their own privileges and rights and rents and all the rest of it. But in Scotland, and in England, they don't take any such oath because that's what that means. It belongs to them. But in Scotland, the reason a Scottish royal candidate would have to promise to preserve, keep inviolate, and never transfer or alienate, which means disempower or marginalise the Scottish crown, is that the King or Queen in Scotland, King or Queen of Scots, is not the crown. The people are. We can prove that from the Scottish treason laws. The last monarch that we can find that actually took the Scottish coronation oath was Anne, which is important because she was the one that organised the treaty as Queen of Scots and Queen of England, and she had already taken an oath to preserve the crown in Scotland, which meant she didn't have any ability at all to alter it. So what that means is that the rights and rents of the crown in Scotland are the rights and rents of the people. That, yes, that's the coal, the oil, the gas, renewables, water, territorial control, the lot. And because Anne took the oath, it means that the Crown of Scotland remains today. And what that means is that Westminster's Parliamentary Acts vesting Scotland's assets in the monarch in right of the English Crown are contrary to law. They're null and void. It really is our energy, our land, and our water. But it means something else. The Scottish Crown still exists. And not one monarch since Anne and since the treaty has taken the legally required Scottish oath. So they've dodged the royal obligation to uphold the sovereignty of the Scottish people. By the way, that's where, everybody's heard that the people are sovereign in Scotland. That's where it comes from. They're sovereign because they're the crown. That's the origin. And it still stands. They've dodged the obligation to respect that. They take an English oath. And that's what we'll see on May the 6th. We'll see a medieval English pageant with the king taking the oath, the English oath that was written in 1689, and he will not take the Scottish oath. And it means that, as stipulated in the twice ratified condition of the Union, the claim of right, not one of them has been lawful King or Queen of Scots.
Wow. That's quite a statement. Thank you, Sarah. Neil, so Tom Devine wrote that independence is dead for a generation. Is it?
Certainly not. I mean, that's a fanciful notion that probably would keep the Unionists excited, but it certainly is not the case. I think that as long as there's breath in certainly in my body and in the body of many of us involved in 2014, then the independence movement is alive and well. It's wishful thinking. I mean, Tom Devine is certainly no arch unionist by any stretch, so I don't want to give that impression at all. But it really seems to be the narrative that the unionists want to set is that the current challenges that the SNP are navigating are somehow the challenges of the independence movement, and that simply doesn't hold up to any kind of scrutiny. Certainly not while Scotland is still under the pressure from the malign influence of the Westminster Tories. The case for independence will continue to grow, and the people of Scotland will do as they did in 2015, put their trust in whomever they feel is the best hope to deliver that. So, to suggest that somehow, the problems of recent days are somehow going to extend into a generation's dismissal of independence, just absolutely ludicrous.
Thanks, Neil. Colette, going to move on to you now. Have we got the political cart before the constitutional horse? If popular sovereignty embedded in our historic claim of right is still extant, should politicians be engaging far more with the wider movement instead of trying to be the movement?
Well, as Sarah just eloquently pointed out, the people of Scotland are sovereign, and we've all seen recently that not one party or one person really should be about independence. The independence movement is a broad church of people, and they are the ones that are the sovereign people. We do own the public assets of Scotland, and we should have the right to then put the case forward outside of the Scottish Parliament, set aside from the Scottish Parliament and what the Scottish Parliament and the elected officers that are in that Parliament do on an everyday basis, who were voted in by the people of Scotland to do that job. So the government are there to govern the country, and the people of Scotland should be then put there to put the case for Scottish independence to the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Colette. David, Scottish Sovereignty Research Group proposed the manifesto for Indy last time round. Will you do so again at next year's UK general election, perhaps making it the last ever election, UK election in Scotland?
Well, we certainly did, and we sent it to all the parties 2 years ago. ISP was the first party to accept the principle. The Alba Party accepted a number of the proposals in the manifesto for Indy. So I know for a fact it's a live issue. We have updated that work, and it's more proposed. The proposal is more shaped for a Scottish election, because its main purpose was to highlight that you were voting for a party that in its manifesto, at the top of its manifesto, it had highlighted that the Scottish Parliament was the only parliament to represent the sovereign nation of Scotland. And if you accept that, and that's what you voted for, you have effectively transferred the powers to the Scottish Parliament, and Westminster no longer exists. So it's a nice, simple concept. And it means the people have decided to grant all powers to the Scottish Parliament. But there's lots of work that still needs to be done before that happens. including a written constitution that guarantees all our rights. So, in short answer, yes, it will be sent out again to all the parties, a revised version. And it is a way of short-circuiting this merry-go-round of asking for permission for a Section 30, then having another referendum. And then even a referendum, as we all know, is simply an advisory referendum, so it doesn't actually trigger anything.
Thanks, David. Would you like to give us a little bit of PR for your upcoming conference?
Yes, we've just started sending out the invitations. As many of your viewers might know, we did a conference last year in Dunfermline. Well, we're doing it again this year, 3 days, 14th to 16th of July. We've already started getting people confirming as main speakers. It will be a slightly different format, less subjects covered, but more in depth. But what I think its purpose is, and certainly I'm going to be saying this through it all under one banner, we're simply a platform for bringing all the parties together and all the yes groups so that we can start discussing, debating, and getting on with preparing for independence. Thanks,
David. Do people have to book in advance, or can they just turn up at the weekend?
They can do both. It'd be better to book in advance. One thing we learned from the last time is people were finding it difficult to get accommodation. So we've now block booked 30 bedrooms in the local Holiday Inn Express. So I know that particular part, it's £125 a day for a room for two, including breakfast. So this is the best we could do. We've block booked 30 rooms. And we're also doing what we did last year as well, creating a campsite on the other side of Dunfermline. So that will allow a great party atmosphere, I hope. Maybe the weather will be nice.
Very good. Thanks, David. That sounds brilliant, actually.
And you'll have me as a neighbour.
Yeah, you can be the warden.
Okay,
it's in my backyard, basically.
Wow. On the first round, Ash, over to you after your bruising leadership campaign. I hope you're well. You're looking well. What is your vision for Scotland's liberation going forward? Is a referendum still in your thinking, or uppermost in your thinking?
Well, I think if we were offered a referendum, I would certainly take that, and I would assume that, obviously it's the SNP in government at the moment. I would assume they would accept that. However, I think that we've spent a very, very long time now trapped in this sort of cycle where we're going round, we're getting mandates, winning elections, getting these mandates, and then using that to ask for, like a moral mandate, and then asking at that point for a referendum based on that. And obviously that's not been forthcoming. So during the leadership contest, I thought that it was best to try to think about this and think about how we would get out of this sort of circle of going round in circles, that sort of trap there. And my view is as well that we shouldn't be, we don't need to ask permission from Westminster, because I do believe that the Scottish people are sovereign, and Sarah was talking about that a moment ago. And, we're in a position now where Westminster is seeking to deny the voice of Scotland being expressed democratically. And we must have a way for Scotland to express their view on whether they want to stay as part of the United Kingdom. So my suggestion, the one that I put forward during the leadership contest, and I was calling it the voter empowerment mechanism, but basically it was just using the ballot box. Instead of using a referendum, you just use the next democratic event, the ballot box, and you ask the people of Scotland for their view on that, and you can involve all the pro-independence political parties. So an obvious good choice for that would be the next Scottish election, although I accept that's a few years out now. And at that point, you could obviously do it at the general election as well. That would be the same. Any other political parties, independence parties that want to stand on that manifesto could all do it together. And if we achieved a majority of votes cast, so that would just be 50% plus one, that instead of seeing that as, both going cap in hand to Westminster to ask them, you would just say, no, this is a clear democratic instruction from the people of Scotland. We will begin negotiations to exit the UK.
What about the circumstance where we have a majority of MPs again, pro-independence? Would that not be enough to start negotiations and later on decide on a confirmatory referendum, as they did, for example, in Norway 100 years ago? The parliament passed, it seceded from Sweden, and ended the union. And the confirmatory referendum was overwhelming support. Would that figure in your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that could work. I mean, it was Margaret Thatcher, I think, that said originally that she accepted this used to be SNP policy, of course, having a majority of MPs, as a democratic event. The Scottish people were putting their viewpoint across, and that was accepted by the Tories in London, that would be legitimate, was democratic, and it showed the will of the Scottish people. So yes, I think you could use a mechanism like that and then confirm it with a referendum if that's a process that you wanted to go down. I felt that for something like this, a higher bar was a good thing to set, so a majority, so over the 50%, rather than just a majority of MPs, a majority of votes cast. But obviously everyone is free to put forward a different suggestion, but that was the one that I picked on. I thought that would work.
Of course, and that would take then several independence parties standing in the same election to get a majority of votes. I take it. Listen, I don't want to make this just me asking questions. Would you like to comment? Anyone like to comment on what the others have said? Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to endorse everything that everybody has said, and particularly the comments that Ash has just made. At the moment, there is a live private members bill in Westminster for self-determination for Scotland. It's very straightforward. It's not a lengthy bill. And all it does is replicate the provisions that are contained in the Good Friday Agreement in the island of Ireland for Scotland, which would entitle the Scottish people to a referendum every 7 years if there was public support for that. And I don't think that is, an impossible ask. And I was very glad that we were able to get that through its first reading with support, not just on the face of the bill, but also in the chamber from all of the independent supporting parties at Westminster. But there's one point that I would just like to add to the comments that Ash made, which I think is absolutely essential and ties very much into the spirit of the march on May the 6th in Glasgow. And that is all under one banner, that united movement. And I would like to see, if we're going to get rid of some of the accusations of division, etc., then I would like to see a slate of MPs from all parties, and most importantly, none, who are prepared to stand on a platform with real determination and a broad set of skills to deliver independence. Because I think that is the best way to galvanise the movement and to clarify the purpose of any subsequent Westminster election. That gives absolute clarity that it is the people of Scotland who have voted for and are represented in that cohort of MPs. I think it's essential that we make that explicit determination.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Anyone else like to chip in?
I would like to say one thing about, we know that we have a lot to get over. We know that the movement is disheartened. We know that people feel disenfranchised. We know that they've lost faith in the political system. And we see, we all know the history of how the movement got split. And there seems to be certain reluctance in people to move on. And it's when you see the bigger picture that I think that becomes obvious. You've got to drop it. And one thing that for me, for instance, illustrates the bigger picture, what we're really up against. Right now, we all, Kenny McCaskill did a detailed kind of revelation of how much energy is going to England from Scotland and being sold without any real return to Scotland. And the reality, and while we are horrified by that, outraged by that, and there's speeches and articles everywhere about how outrageous this is, what people don't realize is that the quasi-legal ground for England's ruling class and the corporations to plunder Scotland's resources is in one phrase, in right of the crown. That's the English crown, not the Scots. There is no UK Scot, no UK crown. They're not compatible. There are two crowns. That is going, and that's why it takes us all the way back to who we are as Scots, what we've a right to, what's being done to Scotland, and what we are damn well up against. We're up against the British state. It's ruthless. It has always been perfidious. It is dishonest. It is what Craig Murray calls a rogue state, and it will put a fig leaf of legality on the reasons why it's entitled to plunder Scotland, but that is what it is. And if we care about what's happening, and if we, if we even have self-interest in terms of this energy gouge that we're all facing, we need to know where it comes from. We need to know who the enemy is. And it, excuse me, but it bloody well isn't ALBA members or SNP members. That's the enemy. It always has been. And if we're going to defeat it, we've got to do it together.
Yeah, can I come in? And I think something that Sarah said, which I thought was interesting, because SSRG's done a couple of things. One, we published the Claim of Right and the Treaty of Union, and that is what Queen Anne looked like. Which I actually had to go and ask someone, is this a man or a woman? Because she's very manly in that image. But the fact is, knowing our history is very important, because if we don't understand our history, then we can't create our present and our future. But one of the things that struck me recently, and this was down in Galashiels, with the coronation going on next week, while we'll all be in Glasgow marching for freedom, and actually putting words into action, we're coming together for one message and one purpose. And I think it's extremely important. I think All Under One Banner is an excellent, if you like, organization for the grassroots to coalesce around. And in fact, it's exactly what SSRG is doing. It's offering a platform to bring all the yes groups, all the political parties and the interested groups and bring them together. And that is what we're now in. So I think it's been a good thing in a way that we're no longer waiting for Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP to come up with their magic solution, because the truth is they don't have a magic solution. That's pretty damn obvious. But the SNP and the ALBA Party and ISP, it's quite clear that we all need to be working together. We all need to be focused on, in fact, one of the things that Ash said during our campaign, which I thought was absolutely spot on, it's the first time I've heard a politician say this. We need to be preparing as if we're already independent, and we need to start building the infrastructures before we're independent. And that's absolutely what we need to be doing.
Yeah.
And that is what the SSRG conference in July is about. It's about laying the groundwork down and getting people to discuss the key issues, and preparing for delivering independence. Because independence isn't about vote yes and that's it over. That's just the beginning of the work. So we need, and there's a lot of work to do. So I think it's excellent that we're now all beginning to work together and no longer waiting for somebody higher up to tell us what to do.
Could I just come in with what David just said there about history matters? And one thing that's been very noticeable with everything that Salvo and Liberation.scot has been doing has been educating a lot of people about our Scottish history and Scottish law, which again we are not really taught about in our schools, about proper Scottish history and the Scottish history that is important for our future and our future generations, especially politically, because politics is your everyday life. One thing we noticed with an ISP is when we wanted to put a petition regarding the Stone of Destiny not going down to London for the coronation, the reply that we got back was quoted, and again, even some of the MSPs and MPs that replied to our letter before this, all quoted English law. But the Scottish Parliament, who refused to put the petition up, was quoting English Crown law, not Scots Crown, English. So even the Scottish Parliament is now indoctrinated the English law. They're not giving the right story. So if this is what the Scottish Parliament are saying, no wonder we actually don't have independence by now, because we're held back by wrong information on what's rightfully ours as sovereign people.
Yeah, it's behaving very much like a colonial entity, I must say.
The fact of the matter is, that the Scottish Parliament is an animal of the British state. It's an organisation effectively designed to give the appearance of democratic control in Scotland. But all of that power that is retained is the very power that would enable Scotland to flourish. And it has taken real creativity in the past to make devolution work for the Scottish people. At the moment, we are in a very challenging circumstance, and you really need to use whatever potential you've got in the Scottish Parliament to work for the best interests of the Scottish people. But the important part of that point is that when the UK Supreme Court told the Scottish Parliament that it couldn't legislate for a referendum, it was talking to an organ of the British state. It wasn't talking to the Scottish people. And the movement must not be confused by that distinction, and be confident in delineating the two, because what it's saying is, under our rules, we'll do what we like, but under international law and under international rules,
Exactly.
that's a different
Exactly.
story.
Exactly.
No one should be confused that the two things are the same, because they're absolutely not.
Yeah.
Can I come in on that, because it's something that we learned through our experts that come to our meetings every week. And this was brought up over 2 years ago, and we were talking about the Scottish Parliament and how the powers that the Scottish Parliament are, if you like, are scoped, are created, of course, in a Westminster piece of legislation called the Scotland Act 1998. So if it doesn't grant you the powers to do something, you don't have the powers. And it's going back to that main point, which is power devolved is power retained. However, and I remember it was myself that brought this up and says, yes, but forget the Westminster piece of legislation, because when you create, and this has been held up in the Martin Keating case, it's up to the people of Scotland to decide in a democratic event, which would be a Scottish election, what powers the Scottish Parliament should have. Yeah. And so if that is the question that's put in front of them, do you want the Scottish Parliament to have all the powers to represent you, and a majority vote for parties that have agreed to that, then all of a sudden the Westminster no longer exists. Its piece of paper, which at the moment restricts its powers, no longer exists. It's a blank piece of paper, and we're out of this mess. But to get to that point, we must have everything in place to show what we're going to do on currency, how our borders are going to work, how our trade with the EU is going to work, what rights our citizens have, how are we going to regulate our energy market, and why we should have a Scottish publicly owned energy company. All that work needs to be put in place for that simple question. It's only 3 years from now, so it's not very far away. And I genuinely believe that is when Scotland can take its future in its own hands. Yeah. At the Scottish election, you vote for parties that will have put that at the top of their manifesto. Some of them may only have that on their manifesto. If you get a majority of the votes, you get a majority of the seats in the Scottish Parliament, that's it. The people have spoken. It's a democratic event. We internationally recognised, and then you get on with developing your independent state.
Absolutely. Well said, Ian. Thank you. Listen, in closing, I'd like those of you who are speaking on Saturday to give us your key thoughts. Obviously, not an extensive summary, but what are some of your key thoughts for that you'll be expressing on Saturday? Colette, can we start with you?
I think really my key message really is that this isn't the end of independence by a long shot. I think people who are anti-independence like to think it's a it's dead in the water for the next 20, 30 years. I think now, with everything that's happened recently in the Scottish politics, I think this is actually could be a very positive fresh start for the independence movement. We're actually looking at different routes to independence, and there are different routes to independence. And just like we're showing here tonight, we have parties and non-parties, groups that come together, and we are willing now to work together, and it's not about one party and one person, and neither should it ever be that again. It should be a collective movement working together on different aspects of the independence movement.
Yeah, well said. Sarah, over to you. I expect you won't be saying Charlie is my darling at the weekend.
I think the key thing I'm going to say is that while the world is riveted by this medieval pageant, and some of us are outraged by the celebration of the English ruling class and this opulence while people are suffering. Some of us are aware that we're witnessing the celebration of a very serious crime against a sovereign nation. It's the celebration of the annexation of Scotland and the imposition of a foreign crown, completely, with complete disregard for any contract between the two nations that would mean that it was a voluntary union. And the way that we come back, the way that we counter this, is we do that together, and we do that by beginning to get past what Alf Baird calls the Scottish cringe, the identity cringe. We start to know who we are, be really proud of that, be really, really loud about that, and go forward in that way as Scots, because we'll find a way. If we don't know who we are, if we don't know what they did to us, we won't. But when we do, we will find a way. And I think, as everybody has said, there will be more than one. There will be more than one strategy that will bring this about. But the one thing that has to be there is the people, the people of Scotland, together and determined and unstoppable.
Yeah. Ash, you'll be speaking at Glasgow Green on Saturday. What will your key thoughts be?
Yes, I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I know there's people who are still members of the SNP or who vote SNP, and people who maybe used to be, who are looking at what's going on right now, and they're worried. They're worried about what this means for the SNP. They're worried about what this, by extension, means for the independence movement. And I just want to be clear to everyone that, independence is much, much, much bigger than just one political party. And that, if we all work together, which I've been talking about that for the last few months now, I think there's a tendency perhaps in the SNP to think that, independence is all about us and we can deliver it by ourselves. I've never believed that. I don't think that's true. We have to work with all the other political parties and of people of no political party. Some of the most amazing activists that I worked with in the 2014 campaign were in no political party. So I think it's really important we all work together. So I think that's the main message, that it's independence above everything else, that if we all work together, we'll get there. And it's much bigger than one political party.
Oh, and that's a very welcome message, I must say. Ash. David, briefly, what will you be communicating?
Yeah, well, apart from I'm there to highlight SSRG's work and the fact that we are a non-partisan group that brings all parties and none together, I think all under one banner is a demonstration that no one political party or group controls the Yes movement. That's to be welcomed. And I think we are smarter, better educated than we were in 2014. We're more on top of the briefs and the big questions. So I think more power to their elbow, all under one banner. And also, I'm looking forward to a successful open conference in Dunfermline in July. And I think these two events will set us up in the autumn. And I think what's a key important fact is the polling shows that there has been no diminish in support for independence. So parties come and go, they go up and down in the polls. But the Yes movement has stayed pretty damn solid in the last 8 years. So it can only go up.
Thanks. Neil, you won't be speaking, I don't believe, at the rally?
No,
But,
I'm giving some other some of the other leadership members a chance, and all under one banner. And be very gracious about it as well.
Okay. Would you like to wrap up?
I think we've got fantastic speakers. I'm delighted to be going along as a member of the independence movement to give my support at the march and the rally, and I'm looking forward to not being distracted by what am I going to say as I take part this time, which is really going to be good fun. I'm going over in a car full of friends from Fife, so it'll be a great event. Can't wait. But I think the one thing that I would say to anybody going along or thinking about going along is there was a poster during the last Indie Ref that I just thought encapsulated everything for me, and that was the one with the word "can't" with the T crossed out and that said "can." And don't for 1 second ever believe or let the unionists or anybody within the movement tell you that we can't take independence forward, because we absolutely can. And as David's highlighted and others, and I pay tribute to everybody on this call tonight for having the resilience to keep pushing forward, because that's the only way to sort of continue. We have to keep our resilience strong. But I guess that's really the key message. Don't let anybody fool you into believing that we can't. And much of the hard graft has been done by people in SSRG or Tim Rideout. A lot of the groundwork is there. It really just needs to be pulled together. And that, I guess, that spirit of can, that belongs to the movement, not to a political party, so or to any individual. Own that. Let the movement be the leadership of this cause.
Thanks, Neil. And with those thoughts, we'll end for tonight. Thanks, David, Ash, Sarah, Colette, and Neil once again. Till we meet again.